portrait of a woman who's in distress. However, true legal experts about the secondary storyline, the true legal aspects about the secondary storyline, I thought kind of fell short. If someone had done like a really hardcore movie about the conspiracy that you'll see unfolding inside the movie, this could have been a fantastic movie. I mean, when you think about what Soderbergh did with George Clooney and Michael Clayton, you could have done something along those lines, but they didn't. Regardless, when you watch this movie, you cannot take your eyes off Claire Foy as Sawyer. When she's in the screen, she's not lovable, but you root for her at the very, very end to find her own peace. Watching Claire Foy as Sawyer in that completely manic, not sure what she's seeing kind of state, I started thinking to myself, what drink could put you in a drunken state, but have you still be wide awake? And the answer is the one and only club favorite, TVR. Now, what is a TVR? It's basically 1 ounce of tequila, 1 ounce of vodka, and you top it off with your Red Bull. Now, you could use other energy drinks, Monster, Nas, Kickstart, because of the varietal of flavors, but you essentially want to use that tequila and that vodka. Now, the cool thing about a TVR is you can make it as strong as you like or as weak as you like. Just make sure that you have those 3 ingredients in there: tequila, vodka, and your energy drink. Nothing is more annoying than dealing with a wide awake drunk, because the more drunk they get, the more tired they get. But if they keep slamming down caffeine, it keeps them awake. So now they're awake and they're just not quite sure exactly what they're seeing. Early on in Unsane, there were moments where you as the viewer had to really question, is Sawyer seeing what I think she's seeing? Or is she going crazy? Or am I not seeing things the correct way? There was this weird trying to figure out, what am I seeing here and versus what is she seeing? The more you drink a TVR, you will find yourself in that similar state of trying to differentiate what is real and what is not real. A young filmmaker returns home after many, many years away to essentially write a script about his childhood. But when he goes back home, he finds out that his neighborhood has changed and all of his friends have essentially disappeared. That basically is the premise for the film Residue, starring Obinna Nwachukwu as Jay, Dennis Lindsay as Delante, and Talene Stewart as Blue. Now, for all 3 of these actors, this is their first major credit, so there really isn't much to find for them when it comes to having a resume. So when it comes to the characters that they were asked to play, there really isn't much development in any of these characters. I mean, Delante, Blue, and Jay all seem believable, essentially because, in my opinion, they were playing themselves. There really wasn't much an arc or a transformation in any of them. I mean, you could argue that Jay kind of went through a little bit of a change. I mean, at first he was kind of happy to be at home, but he slowly became angered and frustrated by what had happened to a lot of his friends and his friendships. I mean, his neighborhoods. I mean, all of those things all kind of shifted on him. So over time, he kind of became, I won't say embittered, but you can definitely say he wasn't happy with the way things had turned out. Delante, who I thought really could have been developed as a big time character, he was kind of left 2-dimensional. He was remorseless for his lifestyle. And while there are moments where, he doesn't necessarily hate Jay, you can tell that he definitely was not happy with him leaving he and his buddies behind. Now, when it comes to the dialogue in this movie, there really is no script. I mean, you can tell that Obinna just kind of put people inside the scenes and gave his actors direction, which says a lot. Thinking about his potential as an aspiring director. I mean, myself, I kept thinking, what could he possibly have done if he had like a really well-developed storyline and a really well-developed script? There are a few moments where the subtext was used perfectly between characters and the tension is definitely palpable. But other than that, since dialogue is not the same as real speech, the movie just basically uses real speech. I do wish that they didn't use the N-word as much, but, I guess if you're going for that real kind of hardcore, feel, or like really kind of uncut, raw feel, then I guess you have to use the language of the street. Now, as far as the conflicts goes, like what is this story actually about? I kind of boiled it down to, two major conflicts. The first is Jay versus himself. Jay is fighting guilt. Okay, he is guilty about something. It is revealed that as the story unfolds, that his family at a very young age moved out of the hood, and then all of a sudden Jay went to college. And while he was gone, he did not keep up his connections, and some of those relationships that he had deteriorated over time. And when those people moved away, he is almost tortured by that reality. I mean, it hurts him that he has lost aspects of his youth that he could have preserved, and it's by his own fault. I mean, he chose not to do so. The other conflict, I think, is Jay versus the environment. Gentrification is in full swing in Washington, D.C. Let me tell you, I didn't live here per se. My grandmother lived in Washington, D.C. I spent a lot of my summers in Washington, D.C. I went to Howard University. I spent a good chunk of my life inside the Washington, D.C. living there. And I can tell you, it's not the D.C. that I grew up in. And essentially, it's the backdrop for this movie and part of the reason why Jay's youth has evaporated. Everywhere Jay turns, he sees an environment that does not resemble the one of his youth. And I think what makes the film not necessarily sad or depressing, but it has this very melancholy feel to it, is that these are conflicts that you can't overcome. I mean, there's little joy in when you watch this film because, the axiom that you can never go home again, it reigns throughout this movie. I mean, when you think about trying to find your friends, once those relationships have kind of evaporated, you can try to reestablish them. But if the people have moved on, or if you have moved on or grown, it's not that they're gone. They're just not what they used to be. And as far as gentrification goes, once those developers start moving in and they start changing things and buying up houses and repaving over the streets and changing the signs and the different lines of the neighborhoods are redrawn, yeah, that's it. It's gone. And you can't do anything about it. All you can do is just remember what it was like when you were young and running up and down the streets, I guess. Now, as far as plot types goes, I thought this was a journey type. And I felt that, when Jay goes home, he is in search of one thing. And then he all of a sudden kind of discovers himself. So he's going back home looking for his friends to kind of put this film together. But, while he's there looking for them, he discovers his own mistakes. He discovers his own guilt. He discovers his unhappiness with the way things have turned out. As he goes about looking for all these individuals and finds little, it then kind of opens up the hurt that he has to overcome regarding how much things have changed and how he really doesn't care for all the new things that have happened. Okay. And, when it comes to those connections evaporating, it's really kind of like, when you think about some of the friendships you had in high school and how over time, because maybe you went to college or they went, to a different college, that you just kind of grow apart. It's not that that you just don't like each other anymore, but you find out that some of the things that you had in common just aren't there anymore. And that is a painful rite of passage, which I also think is another story type. We all grow up and we move away. And when we try to go back and revisit our childhoods, it's hard to accept that things have changed. I mean, no one's childhood is a museum exhibit inside the Smithsonian. And as we grow older and these relationships and these friendships become distance, it's hard to accept sometimes. Thematically, I thought this film had kind of like a redemptive theme. Jay is dealing with a lot of things regarding the context that he's lost, especially with two friends who are the focal points of his movie. The question is why? What happened to them? And why does he have so much guilt for not keeping in contact with the both of them? Part of this journey that he's on is confronting them and dealing with the gentrification issues along the way. Another theme of this movie also could be like that whole friendship theme and what it means to be a true friend. Throughout this movie, Jay's loyalty is constantly questioned by those he has come back in contact with, and it makes you wonder about all those flashbacks. Were they as fond as he remembered, or were they more or less a figment of his imagination? Now, when it comes to the structure of the film, it does follow your typical three act structure, but what's tricky about it is that because the story really isn't really fleshed out really well, it just kind of meanders a little bit. Now, the movie is roughly about an hour and 30 minutes. And in that first act, is best to my, ability to kind of discern how the acts are. I think in the first act, you see him return home. In the second act, the realization that things have changed begins to set in. But midway through the movie, he starts to realize that he just really doesn't fit anymore. And then when the movie breaks into its final and third act, he goes about looking for his friends. Now, as far as Obena's directorial debut, this is kind of like his first real film. And so while there's not a great deal of technical expertise, there are some bright points where his compassion and love for the city really and truly shines through. He does a great job of capturing the authenticness of Washington, D.C., from the music to the clothes and to the characters that the clothes that the characters wear. And as somebody who is, from this city, to me, it all really, really rang true. This is more or less an art house movie. Right? Not a lot of lines, not a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of images, and the angles in which those images are taken are so wonderfully done and shot with delicate care. They really capture the purity of the moment. Whether it's the rust on a fence, or like the water in the puddle of a manhole, or a massive construction hole that's in the ground, visually, when you watch this movie, you get it. There are moments where you understand how this is a low budget, film because of some of the lighting and the microphones and the sounds, and the fact that there really are no scenes or sets. The movie was simply shot inside people's homes and on locations out on the street. The flashbacks were used perfectly, and the imagery used in those conversations highlight the emotionality. I thought it was really, really done well. There, too much dialogue, I think, would have ruined the visual storytelling that was being done. And while the editing at times does seem a little bit choppy, I thought that the movie moved along as best as could, with the scenes being, shot in proper sequence. There were a few moments where you kind of figure out what's going on, but for the most part, I thought he did a really good job of having the story just kind of flow along. What worked for me was just a pure, raw, uncut story that was told with authenticity and emotion and tenderness. What didn't work for me, I thought, was that the characters, I thought, were just a little bit too flat. I thought they could have been developed a little bit more with a little bit more of a backstory. The film was rated R mainly for language, and as far as Aristotle goes, there are no unconvincing possibilities. To me, this movie basically plays out like a documentary. Everything seemed very, very real. IMDb gave it a respectable 5.9 rating. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a very, very high 93. There really wasn't any type of audience or critical score as of this time, so I'm going to give it one, a flat 80%. I thought it was better than average, but not good enough to be considered excellent. Now, from a Cinema and Cocktails rating, I gave this a very solid 3.5 remotes, maybe 4 remotes. I don't know, 3.5 remotes, I guess. It's an enjoyable watch. Now, but what kind of hurts it is that the lacking of the story and exposition of the character, that kind of holds this movie back. And while the images are fantastic and the spine of the script is solid enough regarding friendship and gentrification, there's so much more to me personally I thought that could have been done. Be that as it may, I really enjoyed the rawness of it, the uncut edge, the lack of experienced actors. I thought brought a real authenticity to it, and the flashbacks I thought were great. To some, Residue may be boring, but to others, it may speak right to your soul, which it essentially did to me. Growing up, I used to spend a lot of time at my grandmother's house in Washington, D.C. There was no summer camp, right? When it was spring break, you go into your grandmother's house. When school is out in the summertime, you go into your grandmother's house. When it was Christmas break, you are going to your grandmother's house. And I remember during those summer breaks that my grandmother used to make sun tea. And when she made sun tea, she would basically take like this big, huge jug from way, way back in the day. And she would fill it with like all these tea bags, and she'd fill it up with water. And then she would like put it outside on the back porch and then just let the sun heat it up and brew it. And then she would bring it in. And I swear she would get like that 5-pound bag of sugar and empty something like 1/3 of the bag into the jug, making tea that was so sweet that by the time he poured it in your glass, you had to cut it again with some more water behind it.